thank you all for joining us for kind of this panel discussion this afternoon on the charging and fueling infrastructure funding opportunity. We are still waiting for specifics of the round 2 funding opportunity and where that differs from round 1. But we'll get into some of what we know now on that front, but mostly focus on round 1 applications, what we felt made for a strong round 1 application, and for some of the people in the call, what made for a successful round 1 application. So with us, we have Meg Maloney from the city of Dayton. We have Dana Vingris from SOPEC. We have Grace Gallucci from NOACA up in Cleveland. We have Alyssa Lenkel from the Electrification Coalition, and Santos Ramos from ODOT, from the DriveOhio team, actually. So I guess first off, please introduce yourselves and kind of mention how you fit into the CFI application or your organization's electrification plans. So starting off with Santos.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, thanks, Jacob, for putting this together and letting us be a part of it. As you mentioned, my name is Santos Ramos. I'm a project manager with DriveOhio and focus on managing the NEVI program. So we didn't necessarily, as ODOT, applied for any CFI grants, but we're happy to support SOPEC and NOACA as necessary and as needed.
Awesome. Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us here. Next up is Alyssa.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here today. So my name is Alyssa Lenkel. I am a program associate with the Electrification Coalition. And for those of you who don't know, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit group that works at the policy and program level for accelerating EV adoption through local and federal and state work. So excited to dive more into CFI findings from round 1 and how that can shape applications for round 2 with you all.
Great. And next is Dana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Vingris. I'm the Director of Grants and Development for Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council, which is everyone refers to as SOPEC. It's a little bit shorter to say. We are a council of governments in the state of Ohio, and we have 36 member communities and political subdivisions, and we manage electrical aggregation programs and public pricing programs for our members.
All right, and next is Grace.
Hello, and thank you, Jacob, for organizing this terrific webinar. Glad to be here. Glad to see everyone else as well. I am the Executive Director of NOACA. NOACA is the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency. We are both a council of government, a metropolitan planning organization, and an area-wide. And so as executive director, I get involved in everything. So mostly that's a good thing. But occasionally, I'm sure I drive my staff crazy. And this particular project, I was involved in the development of the plan, and then subsequently our phase 1, and then now the grant application for phase 2, which is the CFI. So we are a small agency, under 50 people, and so we are all working directors.
Great. And last but not least, Meg.
Hello, everyone. My name is Meg Maloney. I'm the Sustainability Manager at the City of Dayton. I was on the SOPEC application. We joined SOPEC in 2021. We have a 100% electric fleet goal, and we also have an EV equity plan for our community. So we were excited to be part of SOPEC's application to get charging infrastructure for our city fleet vehicles and also for low income multifamily housing within the city of Dayton limits.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you contributing your expertise to our panel. All right. Well, first up, Santos, you mentioned that you are not directly involved with CFI, but I'd like you to kind of give an overview of how the state electrification plan is going from your perspective and from DriveOhio's perspective, and how CFI can fit into that overall view and strategy.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do so. So, first of all, congrats to SOPEC and NOACA. We're super happy that y'all were able to receive some grants. We keep hearing from other states and just around in the EV space that the CFI program was just very competitive. So we're really happy to see that Ohio was well represented and that we were awarded some funds. So, but yeah, as most of you know by now, Drive Ohio is focused on the NEVI program. And through there, we've been focusing on building out the alternative fuel corridors, which is essentially just the beginning. We are making some progress, and we're hoping that in future NEVI rounds, we'll be able to fill any additional gaps and bolster equity throughout the state. Let me see. So the the plan itself, the electrification plans from NOACA and SOPEC essentially will come into play when we kind of get to that part. Once we are able to build out the alternative fuel corridors, we know the importance of deploying chargers at a regional, city, and community level. So it's just as important as building out the interstates and major highways around Ohio. So once the plans kind of get further developed, we'll be happy to coordinate closely with them and make keep up with the progress that they're making when they start deploying chargers. So I think that's all I got. Jacob, if I have some time though, I can definitely provide the NEVI update now. I think that'd be good in case like the audience is interested.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. So really quick, just I'll make it quick and then I'll pass it over to the CFI experts there. But yeah, we're making good progress. All of the contracts have been executed for the first round. And as of today, we have one operational site just outside Columbus, and we got 8 locations under construction. Specific details about which locations are under construction can be found on our online map, which I can share it through the chat. We're currently evaluating the proposals that came in round 2, and we're hoping that we can announce contingent awards by early May. So yeah, rounds 2 and round 2B, what we're going to call round 2B, will still focus on building out that alternative fuel corridor system, but we hope that we can wrap that up by that upcoming round, and then our plans for rounds beyond that are still in development. But I think that's going to be right on around the time where we're going to start seeing SOPEC and NOACA make some progress, and we'll be happy to coordinate with them to make sure that we're not spending our money in the wrong places.
Great. Well, thank you for that update. And by the way, for all of the attendees, there is an active chat and Q&A section on the call. Feel free to drop, any questions in there. Santos will not be on the CFI part of the panel, but he said he will be hanging out in chat and is happy to answer any questions you all may have. So next up, Alyssa, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of go over what you and the Electrification Coalition have seen from round 1 of the CFI funding, and kind of what you've heard about potential targets for round 2.
Yeah, thank you so much, and appreciate that NEVI update as well. A great piece to kind of follow as we're looking at round 2 of CFI, because of course the corridor side of CFI is focused on building out the alternative fuel corridors in addition to NEVI. So it's important to keep a pulse on how that is progressing in order to inform your projects for the next round. So I did go a bit into about the Electrification Coalition already at the beginning of the call, but again, just super happy to be here and to be able to do what we do in Ohio, which is give cities good information as they pull together their projects and support Drive Ohio and their efforts. So excited to get plugged in with all of you. Before going into the round 2 prep, I did want to take some time to go through our analysis of the round 1 winners and what that can mean for round 2. So we looked at some projects we read cover to cover their applications. Some we were just able to read their project descriptions in terms of awarded applicants. But from all of that analysis, we did see quite a bit of trends and similarities among many, one being that there was quite a few multi-city applications that were awarded, just showing that the regional partnerships are really successful, and those types of projects allow you to collaborate with other cities, but also too, it allows the awarders to cover more ground with who they're giving awards to. So definitely something to consider as you're going into round two, whether you need more capacity or you want to have a bigger project. Definitely partnering up with local cities, other municipalities, or the entire state is definitely an option, and one that is rewarded, as we saw in round one. Additionally, we saw that project awards were evenly split amongst community corridor applications in terms of funding separation. So obviously more community projects were awarded, but the corridor projects that were awarded were the more robust, more expensive projects. So the split ended up being pretty similar in terms of where the funding went. So just something to keep in mind, especially if you're thinking about corridor. Definitely larger projects are favored, as we kind of saw from that funding breakdown. So something to consider, as well as the allocation of funds, the difference between L2 and DC fast chargers. We did see a lot of L2 chargers, not to say that DC fast chargers can't get funded, but it's important to keep in mind that they do prioritize that variety, having a little bit of both as options in that funding. So definitely something to consider as you're building out your project. Additionally, a couple other trends that are applicable to future projects. We saw a lot of thinking outside the box on lead applicants. So it wasn't just always cities, always this. A lot of feedback we get during the grant writing process is capacity and bandwidth issues. So for projects that are having that challenge, there's definitely the ability to vary your lead entity and to sub on certain applications. We saw counties, we saw public authorities, NPOs, and many other organizations that were leading the application that included many. So definitely you can team up with varying public entities in your area, and allows for variety and for joining forces, kind of like I said before. And lastly, the project size and scope varied. So again, as I said, with the community and corridor, we saw community projects and corridor projects both get funded at various amounts. It was a pretty wide range. So they're definitely going up to those higher dollar values, but there's also room for the smaller projects as well, really emphasizing the importance of getting that charging out in the community and really focusing on their overall mission of having chargers readily available, whether you're going locally or you're on those alternative fuel corridors. So there's a lot of room and area for opportunity among all those different thresholds. So in addition to the data from round one and how that can inform round two, a couple other things that we have heard and know about round two is that there's about 500 million slated based on the current scheduling. So that should be a continued competition, a little bit less than last year, but still super duper competitive, still a lot of opportunities for many. We predicted the predicted release is summer of 2024, and we believe that the timeline will be the same, just without that extension, because in round one they had extended the deadline, pushed it back a little bit. We don't anticipate that they'll do that this year. It was kind of like a first year thing, but the time frame that was originally slotted should be the same. And then also just always be checking the key notices of funding opportunity on the USDOT website, because you never know when they might release it early, or when, summer 2024 is different for everybody in terms of when they find that start. So definitely be checking as often as you can. Based off of the interest we've seen in round one and also in round two, with 600 applicants submitted for round one, an application submitted in every state and Puerto Rico, we assume this next round to be pretty competitive as well, with that continued focus on rural and disadvantaged communities and that continued emphasis on workforce development and community engagement. So definitely something that, if you didn't highlight in your first project, definitely something to consider. And if you did, just finding ways to build that out and make sure you are hitting every sort of criteria that they mentioned in those sections of the NOFO. And so now since the NOFO for round 2 isn't out, there are still things that you can do in terms of defining your project. You can use this time to really plan everything out that you know is going to be the same. So start talking to potential partners, because you're going to need to have those partners, those site hosts, the utility, things that you can start building that partnership now, so that when it's time to write the application, you can already have pretty concrete plans, because a lot of those winning applications focus less on the we will statements and more on the we have statements. Obviously, because the awarding, the grant awarders are looking for those projects that are ready to go. Additionally, start identifying the charging needs in your community. So whether that's talking to your residents or talking to businesses, defining where people are needing the charging. It may be everywhere, but just defining those priorities too. Obviously, the build out of that charging network in your area is going to be incremental. So defining your tiers of where you want to deploy first was super important. It's something that you can do during this leeway time. And then scheduling a formal debrief with the joint office if you haven't already. If you applied for round 1 funding and didn't receive it, we definitely recommend emailing to schedule an application review. We have heard that those have officially started, and some cities have started having their reviews. So that's super exciting. And hopefully that will give you a lot of great insight about how you can edit your round 1 project to make it better for round 2 and increase your chances of being awarded. And so beyond defining your project, once you kind of have a pulse on that, if we're still waiting on the NOFO at that point, some other things you can do to start your application would be reviewing the past NOFO and the Q&A documents. We believe the CFI intent and mission will remain consistent, and that NOFO still remains published on the website, so definitely could still be a resource to get some of the major pieces out of the way, and then begin assembling your components. So the things that stay the same with all those federal funding opportunities, setting up a SAM account, identifying your EIN number, and familiarizing yourself with the paperwork and beginning budgeting, all of those things that remain the same for most opportunities. You can definitely start planning now. And then continuing education and outreach with your community is obviously something that can be always ongoing, always evolving, and also gives you the opportunity to be constantly soliciting that feedback to inform your future projects. So joining the grant writing workshops and in-person engagements as well, like these types of webinars are also super informative to continue educating yourself, and then focusing on retooling and resubmission if you have applied before. So like we said, definitely scheduling that formal briefing with the joint office, and then also obviously reaching out to the EC and other organizations for technical assistance now. We would love to help you kind of pinpoint your plans for round 2 and go further into detail with this. So that's just some ideas of how you can be getting started based off what we know so far for CFI round 2, get you in good shape for when the NOFO comes out. You just make those few changes and you can send it on in and be right in the running for round 2. So that is all I have, but excited to hear more from the panelists in the specifics of CFI. So thank you guys so much.
Great, and thank you for giving that overview. By the way, Alyssa did say that those slides will be available to all of the attendees. I'll have them up. The recording of this panel is going to be posted on our YouTube, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. The slides will be available there, or feel free to send Alyssa or I an email, and we can send those to you directly. So moving on to the next part, getting into our panel discussion. So I guess first question is, I mentioned, or I guess we got into some of this at the top of the panel, but please, reintroduce yourselves quickly and kind of specifically focus on what your role in your organization's CFI application was. Starting with Grace.
Sure. Again, I'm the executive director of the organization, and specifically with the CFI grant, this has really been a phase 2 of a multi-phase project. And so I had been involved in the development of our original electrification plan that stemmed back to 2019. And so we are currently in the process of executing phase 1. We've got 40 sites currently under construction. I think they're not all under construction at the same time, but some of them have already been started, and we're about to cut a ribbon very, very soon on a few of those. And so phase 2 was kind of an idea that I had to continue the plan, because the plan had about 120 sites in it. And the funding that we had available from the original cycle was CMAQ funds, and it only covered 40 of those 120. So we had an additional 80 sites that we needed funding for. And so we wanted to pursue the CFI funding for that phase 2. And so in addition to supporting my great staff as a both team member and as kind of a sign off, I think I was able to help the staff work through some of the details of the transition from phase 1 to phase 2, and really work through some of the partnership aspects of the application. And so I think really as we talk about what we were able to accomplish with the CFI grant, you know, I'm just marveled to hear that out of 47 applications that were awarded, that came from 600, and we in Ohio are 2 of them. That's pretty good. I mean, nearly every state applied and we got 2.
Still muted. Awesome. Well, thank you for reintroducing yourself. And yeah, I definitely think it is a great representation of the movement here in Ohio that we did end up getting 2 of the major regional plans approved. All right, next up is Dana.
Hi, everyone. I manage and handle the grants and development efforts for SOPEC when we are a council of governments, and we primarily work with community choice aggregation programs with communities throughout Ohio. As a council of governments, we have the unique eligibility status of a local government, so that does make us eligible as a lead applicant for CFI. And so I think, based on what Alyssa was saying and mentioned, really think outside the box of who might be eligible for CFI funding when you're putting your projects together, because it may not be kind of your first round expectation. We had 2 of our communities, the city of Dayton and the city of Athens, that were interested in applying for CFI funding, but staff capacity was an issue for pulling those applications together. So SOPEC offered to be the lead applicant on behalf of our communities. So we had the information in the project scope of what those 2 communities were looking to request from CFI. And we took a look at the greater Southern Ohio region, where we have a high density of our member communities, and looked at where there was significant charging infrastructure gaps. So looking at Dayton and Athens as hubs for our project, and looking at all of our communities and our members that fell in between kind of those 2 poles, and where we could really build out some charging infrastructure within those communities that many of them don't have. For many of them, this will be their first active charging station. So really trying to just give them that access and remove those barriers for people choosing to transition to driving EVs, and giving those traveling through the region in Southern Ohio options, different route options to travel to. The lack of infrastructure really kind of controlled the traffic and the direction that people were traveling. So having this infrastructure in these communities, a lot of smaller communities, gives people an option to maybe stop and see some new places, which is helping the economic development of those communities. There's a lot of recreational tourism through Southeast Ohio that's going to be much more accessible now for those driving EVs. So we really looked at the broader scope of what our communities were looking to accomplish, and what bringing EV charging infrastructure to them would allow them to continue to build.
Great, thank you for sharing all of that. And Meg, up next.
Yeah, I was going to say this was kind of a perfect timed opportunity for us, because as Dana mentioned, we only have a sustainability office of three, so we have limited capacity when it comes to kind of these larger grants, but we had done a lot of the initial work, thinking about where we wanted to place chargers. And I'll drop in the chat after this, but we developed a plan, two plans, one, an internal plan of where we needed fleet chargers, and then the other plan was where we needed chargers within our community. And so when we talked with SOPEC, I thought this was a perfect opportunity for us to partner regionally, not only because we kind of had a plan in place and knew where we needed the chargers, but I also felt that it kind of helped when we collaborated together as a larger group and wasn't just Dayton going in alone. So yeah, we were happy to join the SOPEC application and very grateful for the opportunity. And I'll go into it a little bit later, but I do think we had some things that we laid in the groundwork for making us competitive in that application.
Great. And yeah, by the way, if there's anything you all would like to share with the attendees that you think might be helpful for them, feel free to link it in the chat. I can also, yeah, make it available to attendees afterwards or post it on our website. So next question, and Meg, I'll start with you. So what lessons did you learn from round one involvement? And what would your recommendations be for best practices?
Yeah, I think the very obvious one that has been talked about a lot is the partnership piece of this. I think when you think about building out large infrastructure across the United States, coming up with a regional approach is really essential. And we know that while there are a lot of charger needs within communities across Ohio, I think that coming up with a more strategic plan when you're thinking about not only where we need chargers within disadvantaged communities, but regionally across Southeast and Southwest Ohio, where do we need chargers within both of those disadvantaged communities is huge. So I think that was kind of the very obvious kind of first step. But then I think the second part of it too was kind of it was fun partnering with Southeast Ohio because we're a very urban suburban area and Southeast Ohio is obviously very rural. So I think that our application was also very competitive because we got to include kind of all of those pieces in when the application was put in.
That is a great point. Thank you for sharing. Grace, you're up next.
I think the biggest lesson that we learned was to have a plan before the funding opportunity becomes available. And so not to be reactive. And this was a lesson that we learned because we were prepared. So we had this 2019 plan. We already began phase one. So we had a lot to offer in the application. And it was obvious in our application that we were not being reactive and we were not simply going after the funds because the funds were available. We had a plan and the funds were going to help us deliver on that plan. So I think that worked really well. Certainly the partnership aspect of it, I would concur was very, very important. We're a regional planning agency, so we always work across 5 counties and across cities, suburbs, and rural areas. And having the individual organizations that wanted to do this alone join us as one big application certainly helped us to win the award as well.
Great. And Dana.
Yeah, building on what both Meg and Grace have shared, I think, really looking at, we were also prepared in that the city of Dayton had already done a lot of work with their equity planning for their EV build out and their fleet goals. And the city of Athens has that as a priority for them as a community as well. So there was we had a strong foundation to start. And so by taking that and looking at those two lists of priorities for those two different communities, and then really engaging our other communities and partners within those communities to really understand what they felt like they need and what they felt like they wanted, and where those common threads across all of those areas really started to build a project and develop a project organically from that. So I think, obviously filling critical infrastructure gaps was a strong start, and being able to connect communities better by having this charging available and accessible, and really laying the groundwork also for future planning. A lot of our communities are at different stages of EV adoption, whether it be for their municipal fleets or for the residents and drivers or for those driving through. But the reality is you have to have the infrastructure there for people to make those decisions and to make those changes. And so we were looking at what the current needs are and then looking forward of how those communities might grow and adapt and change, and trying to lay the right groundwork for that. But a lot of that does really come from a lot of engagement and conversation and dialogue with all of your partners and anyone included on the project. There's a lot of things that come out of those conversations that you may not expect that really help kind of guide the direction and the growth of how that project comes together. And they may not have capacity to write the grant themselves, but it's also more tools in your toolbox for pulling this together. So a lot of times they'll have something to contribute. In the very least, you can put together an impressive letter of support portfolio to submit with your application as well. But I do think that those conversations and really trying to listen to your partners and hear what they have to say and what they're needing, and then building from there is a really strong approach.
Great. Well, thank you. So you all mentioned the importance of kind of having a plan first, and then seeing this as an opportunity to support that plan. For, I guess, especially for RPOs and cities and communities who haven't gotten to that stage yet of having that electrification plan or that sustainability goal. Are there any kind of resources or models or advice that you would give for those communities?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So I love free things. And what has been so great is a lot of our EV planning has come to us through free resources that we took advantage of. So we partnered with Power Clean Future Ohio, Clean Fuels Ohio, and AES Ohio to do our fleet plan. And as part of that, we looked at how many chargers were needed for our fleet. Those programs were completely free, so we got a free EV assessment, and then based on the number of EVs that we were replacing every year, we got like a charging assessment that AES Ohio created. And I know a lot of utilities are interested in partnering with cities, especially because the more chargers you add, the more stress it's going to put on our distribution grid. So AES Ohio was very interested in kind of helping us assist throughout the process. And then in terms of our public charging assessment, we did that all in-house. And I actually did not think it was needed to be too fancy. We ended up just holding a couple of community meetings. We ended up doing several GIS assessments on where charging gaps were, where population density was, and then where our low income and disadvantaged communities were. So the one that I put in the chat was that GIS assessment that we did with our planning department. And so I don't think that while planning processes can usually take a long time, I don't think they need to be anything fancy, again, because our GIS assessment was pretty straightforward. And then holding a couple outreach sessions was pretty simple too. The last part I'll add too is the Electrification Coalition has been huge. We're part of their EV Smart Communities. That is also a free resource that we got through them. And they have also been helping us identify those charging gaps as well. So that program is currently ongoing, and the Electrification Coalition has a lot of amazing resources. And so I think that between all of those partnerships, and then again, us partnering with SOPEC, which SOPEC is really just, I see them as really just an extension of our sustainability office to kind of complete the grant application and help us with all of that. It was fairly easy. So I'll put all those resources that I just named. We do have a website that names all of that. And so I'll put that again in the chat that people can scroll through. And again, those were all free to the city of Dayton.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing all of this, Meg. Grace and Dana, do you have anything that you would add to that?
No, I think that was terrific. Just be ready for when the funding opens. So work on a plan, get help from those free resources. We like to do things the hard way up here in Northeast Ohio. So you can do that too, and have staff, be very creative and come up with whatever they can for whatever jurisdiction you cover.
I think we found for our communities, obviously the resources Meg mentioned we were aware of because that's how they were able to prepare for what they were looking for to include on the project. City of Athens also participated in a National League of Cities CFI boot camp, which they found very helpful and came away with a lot of resources that were shared with us as a lead applicant. So I think a lot of times, even if you're assembling a lot of communities that have participated in these kind of different resources that are available, a lot of times, like that's a way to extend your capacity as an applicant with those partners on the project, kind of helping you do that hunting and gathering of a lot of, great information and tools that can help you build out a stronger project as well.
Great. Yeah, I feel like that was a pretty comprehensive list of resources. Thank you all. I guess my only addition to that would be, I guess, on the topic of finding partners and forming a coalition project, my advice would just be get the word out there now. Mention it to us or to SOPEC or even the team over at DriveOhio. We all have a lot of meetings, have pretty extensive networks throughout the state. Things have a way of getting out into the ether, and we can always help connect you with other potential regional partners or resources to help develop those proposals. All right. Well, next question is, I guess, what has your organization done to build partnerships and to identify partners? What was, I guess, what was the process for identifying partners, recruiting them, identifying what they would need to be contributing to your application, and then Meg, for your side, kind of what would you advise somebody who is like a community who is intending to be a partner on an application, not the prime, but a sub partner on that application? What would you recommend that they get started now? And we can start with Grace for this one.
Yeah, so I'd say we identified partners in two different ways. First, there were those communities or those jurisdictions, those organizations that wanted to apply on their own. And so they were already thinking about it. They may have already had plans, and they contacted us because they knew that we already had a process going for our phase one and wanted to know if we should partner together or what we were going to do. So that was one way. And then the main way that we got partners is in our plan. We identified specific locations on a map based on a lot of technical data, such as the number of EVs in that particular area, the number of chargers within that area, the potential based on income and other demographics of future purchases. And so we identify close proximity to the highway system, close proximity to public assets. So we took all that data, we identified really good spots that we thought would make both for good applications as well as it would just be the right place to put these. And then we took a look, I think, at a mile radius around that point and looked at potential partners within that mile. And oftentimes it would be public spaces such as a rec center, a library, city hall. And we took those and then we contacted those communities and said, if we put a pin where we thought the EV chargers make the most sense, it falls within your city near your rec center. Would you be interested in partnering with us for the application or for the plan? And we had done that in the first place to see if there was some general interest gauge. And then we did it again with the application just to make sure people were still interested. So those were the two ways that we were able to find partners. And the first phase, there was no local match required. we were able to use toll credits for local match. And so that made it pretty easy to be a partner. Obviously, in this round, we have local match requirements. And so that made it a little bit trickier to ensure that the partners understood what their potential contribution to the project was. And so if we were to be successful, they would have a financial commitment. And we tried to make that very clear up front with them so they wouldn't be surprised once we did get the award.
Great. Well, Dana, your turn.
Sure. So we had a similar approach in some ways, but we took a look at a map and we mapped out where existing infrastructure already existed, and then where there were significant gaps. And then we took that map and we overlaid it with our community map for our membership. We took a look at that, and where there was some where those maps aligned really well, we connected with those communities, talked to them about the large scale vision that we had for the project, and that we wanted to include them on that and bring charging to their communities, and talk to them about where they felt charging would be best located for their community, to support the residents in their community, but then also understanding how, if people are coming through, where would they likely stop, or where does existing infrastructure, built infrastructure already exist that would make installing a charging station maybe a little easier in some places than others, so that you don't have those hurdles to overcome. So there was a lot of engagement on a very individual level with those communities to really understand where charging made sense in those communities, and then where the partners should be. And then we would use those communities to actually help us connect with those partners. Because we have the relationship with the communities, and then the community leaders obviously have those relationships within their individual communities. They really facilitated a lot of that conversation and resource gathering and the things that we needed. So that helps the process as well. I mean, these applications are a big lift, and there's not a lot of time to do them. So I mean, I think the more you can deploy that team within that partnership to really help you get what you need to pull the application together, it just helps things run smoother, and you get faster responses and really what you need. So I think that was critical for us to identify who those partners were and where those locations were, was really those individual conversations with the communities and where their needs were.
All right.
Great. And I'll just add into that, as a partner, I think that what's nice about SOPEC is we're all familiar with our member communities, but I think that when I look to join partnership applications, there's a lot of moving pieces to grants, and it can feel very overwhelming at times. So I think that when SOPEC asked, if I can't remember if SOPEC asked or I asked or how it actually came about, but I think that it's really easy to work with SOPEC. We're all on the same page. They are really good at managing a lot of, what the needs of all their different member communities. And so it was pretty simple to join in on the application. I think that we're really lucky in that regard. I know that with all the grants coming down, it can be sometimes very difficult being on applications where there's a lot of different partners and a lot of different interests. So I think as the city of Dayton, my biggest thing is making sure that it's not going to be too complicated of a process and that our needs are going to be heard. So SOPEC is really good at advocating for us. And so that is why I'm usually always happy to join on a SOPEC application. And also Dana is a very excellent grant writer. So
Awesome. Well, so next up is our Q&A session. And I guess to get us started, you all mentioned utilities being involved at various stages of your applications. So what were our usual advice for developing an electrification proposal is talk to your utilities early and often. They're going to be able to provide a lot of input about what existing infrastructure can support, where, what are possible good locations, especially when you're talking about level 3 chargers. So for NOACA and for SOPEC, what was your level of utility engagement in your applications, and what were they able to contribute?
I can take this one first. We actually, based on just the nature of what we do, we have a lot of utility engagement on an ongoing basis. So those types of conversations for us are really regular ones that we have for various different options and reasons and things that we do. With our project, because we were across a couple different service areas, we had a couple different utility partners we did have to engage with. So on the Dayton side of the project is AES Ohio. On the southeast side of the project is AEP Ohio. So we had actually two that we were conversing with and kind of comparing notes and trying to make a cohesive project across some different service areas with different providers. So, and the conversations were a little bit different too. I mean, to Meg's point, Dayton is a very urban built environment. There's a lot of concrete. There's a lot of different, it's a very built environment, and there's a lot of things to work around. And there's certain ways that the city builds things that are, and AES Ohio knows that because they work with the city a lot on all of their projects. So they're very well aware of what those challenges are. Across Southeast Ohio, it's very rural, a lot of other challenges, but different challenges. And AES Ohio is familiar with those challenges because they're working with those communities when they're building out the utility infrastructure there. So to your point too, with upgrades that are needed for, say, level 3 charge, we had a lot of stations on our project that we called them combo stations, but they have a mix of level 2 and level 3 charging. And in a lot of these smaller communities, that the utility infrastructure that's existing, that was a concern. So we really had to have a lot of those conversations about what sort of upgrades would be needed to support the installation of the chargers and then the active use of those chargers. So I think really having those exploratory conversations and talking through your project and talking through options, we went in open-minded because obviously, like, we wanted this project to be successful. So we had a vision, we had an idea, but we also understood that there's a lot of other variables at play with how that actually materializes. So I think being open-minded to that and really knowing what your end goals are with what you want to accomplish, but then working with those partners to find the best way of getting there. And those utility partners are going to be a significant piece of that conversation.
Great. Well, thank you. Grace, do you have, did you have different experiences up in Northeast Ohio or?
No, I think we had very similar experiences. And I think it is worth noting that the biggest challenge we have had, even in the installation of phase 1, is doing that preliminary site work that has to be done and ensuring that there's electric to the location that you intend to put this in, and that if there's not, that all of that is taken care of ahead of time. Don't let too much time pass. What we found is in some cases, when we did the original site inspections, the electric was there, it was sufficient. And then because so much time lapsed between the site inspection and when we were able to move forward with a bid, we had one situation where a building is now on top of that location. So we certainly can't install the EV charger there. In other cases, they just want it moved to a different location down the street or around the block or somewhere else in the parking lot. And once you do your environmental work, you can't change that location without doing additional environmental work. So it becomes real challenge to time it such as everything flows in the proper order and the proper direction to get you where you need to be.
Awesome. I just got the alert that we only have 5 minutes left. Hopefully it's not going to kick us all off. But I guess that means I need to move a little faster. So the next question is from Marty Cohen. It was mentioned earlier that most of the awards were for level 2. I guess why do you all think that was? Actually, Alyssa, I'll direct this question to you. Why do you think that was? Was that based on needs assessments or applications or funding limitations, or just kind of an accident of which proposals were accepted?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple factors that were at play for this. One being, obviously, for the community projects that were awarded, they could deploy a lot more level 2 chargers for the price of those couple of DC fast chargers, which is why we saw so many level 2. But additionally, especially in the community projects, it's a community planning aspect. So instead of having all these chargers where you can just fully charge, it's the intention of you go to the store and there's a charger there and you plug in while you're at the grocery store, and you know, maintain that battery that you kind of lost in transit going there, since so much charging is happening at home. It's just kind of like a maintainer, and allows people to get out in the community and spend some time and walk around. So we see a lot of the community chargers being level 2, and then also the ones that are building out the alternative fuel corridors are going to be those more DC fast chargers. And the third and kind of biggest thing is the grid capacity in our community specifically. It's a lot easier to put in the level 2s for what our grid can handle right now, and with the intention of maybe as we build out the grid one day, making those, you know, upgrading those to DC fast chargers if the area requires it, and having only had to do that construction one time. But just for right now, for rapid deployment and covering all of that ground in that community, level 2s are just more manageable and can allow for more charging stations to become accessible. And so with the intention of little trips in the community, bigger trips along the corridor.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can do kind of our outros, and you know, maybe continue the Q&A after that. I'm just worried that we will all get kicked off this call in about 2 minutes. So next question, and we can keep this at a pretty high level. Carl Lissick from Indiana asked, for NOACA and for SOPEC, did your plans include any other alternative fuels besides electric vehicles? And did you include resiliency planning in your proposals?
For NOACA,
I can go ahead and go.
Yeah, for NOACA, we did not include anything but EV because it was specifically a study about EV. And in terms of the second part of the question, in terms of resiliency, I'm not sure. I'm going to say yes, because I know my staff is extremely comprehensive, and so they do a terrific job. But the study was really mostly about the locations.
And we did not have anything but EV charging on our project as well. That was the needs that were and the desires that were expressed by the partners on our project. As far as resiliency goes, we really, when we're trying to build out the project and looking at infrastructure upgrades from a utility perspective and the built environment perspective for these chargers, that those contributions, even if people weren't charging at the stations yet, if they didn't have an EV yet, that the improved broadband access in Southeast Ohio would be a measure, and that the utility upgrades with the needed upgrades to support the charging stations would just make those communities a little bit more resilient in the event of like extreme weather and natural events.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing those. So yeah, quick outros, and then we can continue on with the Q&A. Alyssa, you're up first. Is there anything from Electrification Coalition's end that you would like to kind of highlight, upcoming events or webinars or something that you're just really proud of?
Yeah, of course. We have a lot of exciting things in the work. April is a big month for us in terms of webinars. So on the 18th, we have our medium heavy duty focus webinar that will focus on collaborations between cities and partnerships with the freight sector. So kind of combining these two worlds that have a lot of opportunities, but don't necessarily get a lot of focus. So I'll be sure to drop the link for that. We also have a webinar for our launch of our Drive Tool 2.0. So that is a dashboard for rapid vehicle electrification, helps determine the fleets that you will be converting your fleets to, what vehicles will work, and you can put in your specific specs. And we've taken feedback and have made a round 2, so we're really excited to launch it. So we also have that on the 24th. And then in May 2nd, I believe we have a tax credit focused webinar. So I'll be sure to drop all of those links in the chat. But yeah, and also just feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. We're always here for technical assistance and excited to support all of you in your endeavors. So thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Meg, you're up next.
I don't have too much like webinars or anything to share, but I will say that if people want to contact us about our EV fleet plan or our EV charging equity plan, I'll put my email in the chat, or they can find all our information on the City of Dayton's website. And I'm happy to talk to anyone also about the free resources we utilize as well.
Great. Dana.
We don't have any webinars or any events per se coming up either. But if there's any questions about kind of how to engage a council of governments in this kind of application, or some methods or things just generally about how our project came together, we're happy to have those conversations, and I can put my email in the chat as well.
Awesome. And Grace.
Last word, I think everyone on this panel and everyone who is listening to the webinar all have an interest in what we see as the future for sustainability as well as transportation technology. And so just keep up the good work and keep moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you all. We haven't been kicked off yet, so maybe we can continue with the Q&A, but trying to be respectful of your time. I know I had only asked up until 4 o'clock today, so if you need to step off, definitely feel free. But if not, the other question I saw was, have public utilities or co-ops been active in development of EV charging? I can add a little bit on this front, because I know public utilities have been pretty limited in what they've been able to do just due to the regulatory environment of utilities in Ohio. But I'm curious kind of what experience you all have had with, I guess, utilities being proactively engaged on the EV infrastructure side.
I would say that we have not had experience where they're proactively engaged, but they certainly get engaged once we are working on a site and we need their assistance.
Yeah, we're lucky down here in Dayton. AES Ohio has been excellent. So they put in a recent rate case in 2020 about having EV rebates, and they kind of kickstarted a lot of conversations about charging infrastructure. And then with the EV fleet plan, they were obviously then very proactive at, like, when we outlined where we wanted our chargers, they gave us like quotes on the cost of work that it would be. I will say too, we've also been just very active in conversations with utilities whenever they have a rate case come up and they put things in there about charging infrastructure. They always ask for kind of the City of Dayton's opinions and how they can help support rolling out EV charging infrastructure, especially in disadvantaged communities too, which has been really great. So shout out to AES Ohio. We're very grateful for all the wonderful things that they have been doing for us.
And I would echo Grace. I don't know that we've necessarily experienced active, like, proactive activity with utilities, but they certainly at this stage have not presented any barriers. And they've been happy to engage in the conversation and provide resources and answer questions and be part of the conversation and planning process.
Great. Well, that is wonderful to hear. All right. One other question. And Alyssa, I'll direct this one to you as well. Have you heard anything about what the U.S. Department of Transportation is planning to do with unallocated funding from CFI Round 1? Done the math, there's about a 70 million difference between what was approved and what was available in the funding window. And I'm just curious if you've heard if they're like rolling that into Round 2, or if they have a plan for that.
I believe it would be rolled into Round 2. I'm not 100% sure, though. I know that, like, for example, there was some set-aside funding with NEVI that was turned into programs on a needs basis. So, for example, the NEVI set-aside went into the charger reliability and rehabilitation funding programs. I'm not sure if they're planning to do something like that or if they would just roll it over into the next round. But I can't say, but we've definitely heard these questions before. So definitely people are aware of it. And I'm sure they'll give us some further guidance on that, but I'm not 100% sure.
All right. Well, we won't hold you to it. All right. And the last question that I see is for Dana and for Grace. How did your applications approach finding, or I guess, how did you approach finding site owners, site hosts, and what was your approach towards like junior partners and subpartners and I guess the partners in general owning and operating the infrastructure, or did you seek out vendors who were responsible for that entire, I guess, entire deployment structure?
Sure. For our project, actually, we have a lot of smaller communities, and the cost share requirement was actually going to be a significant barrier for them participating in the project. So we actually we have not selected a vendor yet because we haven't been able to start the project. We're still in the negotiation phases of the grant agreement. But we're going to go to an RFP process to select a vendor, and we are going to have the vendor host the cost share requirement of those locations. So in exchange for that, and because a lot of these communities don't have the capacity to manage this additional asset and resource, and they don't have plans for it, and we sort of brought this to them and said, would you like to have this? That the performance period for the grant, the 5-year performance period, the vendor, everything's going to be independently metered. The vendor's going to be carrying the cost of the usage, and will be maintaining the equipment and making sure that it's reliable and everything else. And but then also it's hands off for our communities. So that was attractive for a lot of our communities, and that they just didn't have the capacity to take this on at the time. But now we have 5 years of performance period that the vendors are sort of covering that to really help our communities plan for what happens after the end of the grant period.
And I'm sorry, what was the question?
It was poorly phrased on my part. I'm sorry. What was your approach towards structuring the site owner, site host, I guess, model? Or I think the point is who's operating the infrastructure? What was your approach towards finding an operator for the infrastructure?
So we have not yet begun working on phase 2, which represents the CFI grant. We're still in discussions with the partners as to what the responsibilities are. But we do have phase 1 that was with our CMAQ funds as an example. And what we did there is first negotiate with each of the partners whose sites we would locate these charging stations on. And they would agree that we would get a vendor. So it's one vendor for the entire system. So there were 40 chargers, and that vendor would design them, install them, and essentially maintain the data collection and some of those operations features. What we decided not to do, although it was an option for us, was to give individual subawards to the communities where each one would go out and purchase or procure their own charging station and install it. It was very important for us to make it easiest on the communities. Most of them did prefer a joint procurement with us. And then in the long term, we really have a need for consistent data collection. And that was something that was very important in the RFP.
Great. Well, thank you both for sharing those stories. And thank you all again for joining our panel. I think that was the last of the questions that I've seen in chat and in the Q&A. So I will let everybody go. Thank you, wonderful panelists, for sharing your expertise, and thank you, attendees.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.